Ladies and gentlemen, we're just miking up the last guests who've just arrived, so just please bear with us. Probably going to be another 5 minutes or so. Thank you.
Are we going to leave the mic on and then just drop the volume on your side? Yeah, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of Nation in Conversation 2018, which, as you know, will be recorded and live streamed from the country's premier event on the agricultural calendar, and that, of course, is Nampo, which takes place this week near Bothaville. Now, the significance of this platform cannot be overstated. It has been bringing thought leaders from the entire value food chain together to converse on topical issues for the last 6 years. I am Marlon Abrahams, and I'll be your host tonight. A very special welcome to all the media here tonight, in particular our media partners. That would be CakeNet, ADIS here, 702 Talk Radio, Power FM, News 24, Landbou Weekblad, Volksblad, Farmers Weekly, and of course Business Day TV. And of course we'd like to welcome our sponsors, Senwes, NBK, AFGRI, Monsanto, Nedbank, Grain SA, Engen, Hinterland, Imperial, Isuzu, and the Land Bank. Now, without your passionate involvement and support, we probably would not be here tonight. Just before I continue, some basic house rules. Cell phones, please turn them off. The radio waves does interfere with our broadcast. We are live streaming on the Nation in Conversation website, so be careful not to make any funny faces or grimaces or stuff. It will be live streamed. Then also the bathrooms, through the door to your right, keep going, you will come across it. And then finally, we have translation services available, ons het vertalingsdienste. If any of you need anything to be translated, just raise your hand, one of our crew will help you. As enigeen van julle vertalingsdienste nodig het, steek asseblief jou hand op en een van ons span sal julle help. There's a guy over there. Later on in the course of the event, we will be screening a video, which is in Afrikaans. If you battle with Afrikaans and you think you won't understand, just raise your hand and we'll help you with some translation services. So without further ado, it is now my great pleasure to call on the Nation in Conversation patron and initiator of the idea, Senwes Group CEO, Francois Stradum, to give us a bit of a history about the initiative thus far. Francois.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You are most welcome here. I'm happy to be in our new facility. Last year, those of you who were there remember how cold we were. So I hope it's much, the level of comfort is much better here. Thank you for your attendance on this cold winter's day. It's a good reminder that we are in South Africa at the start of a very important event, but also a season for us. It's time to bring in the harvest. And for that, we thank our Lord and our Savior. I would like to honor all of you. All of you are important. Marlon has already referred to our sponsors, our media partners, and I look forward to our panel. And at this stage, Nick, thank you very much for hosting us tonight and anchoring it. And then a lot of good friends that has been with us right from the start. And I'd like to recognize them as I look through them. Mpumelelo, Prince, you are guys that were there right from the start. Grain South Africa, who welcomed us with open hands. That first time at Nampo 2013, it seems like yesterday. So 5 years ago, during the annual Senves Future Focus event at Nampo, the Nation in Conversation Agri Talk show was launched, and it was initially just a Senves issue, but we very soon realized that we should make this a platform for dialogue for the whole food value chain. And of course, immediately some of our main sponsors entered. The idea was to get key stakeholders in the agri value chain together to have serious conversation about the state of agriculture in South Africa. Agriculture is, of course, considered one of the cornerstones of any country's economy. And with mounting pressure in South Africa to feed its constantly growing and urbanizing population, as well as that of the continent of South Africa, it remains imperative that the importance and the value of the food production value chain be understood and appreciated by ordinary citizens. In 2014, as I said, we started this dialogue platform. 2015, for the first time, both in English and Afrikaans, some panel discussions at Nampo, more than 40 panel members at that point. And for the first time, we shot a 13-episode Nation in Conversation TV series that was broadcast on CakeNet, Business Day TV, and Soweto TV. 2016 marked the fourth consecutive broadcast of Nation in Conversation at Nampo. The show saw an increased exposure and awareness through the development of the Nation in Conversation app, which allowed everyone to participate in the conversation directly with the show. 2017, last year, the conversation continued, and the 4th of January, Nation in Conversation with the second episode of another series. The filming of that 13-episode series already began in November 2016, and the new series also took us on a new road and shining the spotlight on the most prominent agri-industries while highlighting tourism in that specific region. We decided to add tourism to the platform, and I think very important. The on-location inserts were complemented with in-studio discussions by the hosts with various commodity experts. And of course, Theo Foster is here right from the start. Theo, enthusiastically, one of our main supporters. Thank you very much for what you've done over time. So it brings us to current where we are. At the moment, we are about midway through the third current series of the TV programs, which takes a look at various commodities such as cherries, coffee, milk, beef, pork, carrots, sunflower and soya, avos, wheat, dates, and nuts. I think not some of the most prominent and big volume commodities, but very, very important and growing in their importance. And you'll be exposed tonight to two of our foremost producers in that area on the panel. I really look forward to that. Vito and Tommy, thank you. We look forward to your contribution tonight. Some of these commodities can be considered in the niche market, but it's becoming, as I say, much more and more mainstream. So what can you expect from specifically Nampo 2018? This year you can look forward to more engaging conversations on topics like policy issues and scenarios. Theo Venter is here from NWU. Thank you for your business school's participation in that. The political perspective, family farming businesses that this year is declared as Theo, thank you for pointing that out early in the year, and we took that topic by the UN. As you know, more than 80% of food production in the world comes from family farms in small, medium, and mega form. So what we eat, what we drink, what we wear comes from families. And then, of course, inspirational women in business, specifically in agribusiness. The economy of scale, I think it's a very topical issue. The whole debate of big versus small, and maybe it's not or, but and of course the youth's experience of how they see agriculture and what their contribution is. This year, the lineup includes, from an anchor perspective, Nick Binedell, Theo Venter, Pieter Geldenhuys, and we see the return of Vandile Kumalu and Rolf Meyer, and of course Theo Foster as some of our prominent anchors. Full details on the hosts and subject matters will be included in the packs. I think at this point, these are all busy individuals, and I would like to honor them answering to the call that our new state president, Cyril Ramaphosa, said of the well-known You Masekela song, Call Me. And I think you're answering to that call. So thank you very much for your valuable time. Nation in Conversation really serves as a voice for the producer and its key partners in the value chain. And I would like to end off by conveying my sincere thanks to our sponsors and partners, without whose involvement this would not be the success as it. Special thanks to AFGRI, Monsanto, Nedbank, Grain SA, Engen, Hinterland, Imperial Land Bank, NWK. I'm really sorry that John Deere isn't here tonight, and I'll make it my task to get them back on board. They should be here. Special word of thanks to Studio Republic, Werner and Runel at the back there, Werner here. They were there right from the start. They worked tirelessly, and there are no better partners than you and your whole team here. Some of you were there right from the start. Armand, where are you? The production team. These are dedicated individuals who work very hard, and I talk to them at the end of Nampo every year, and this is the way that they feel that they make their contribution to South Africa. So I honor you for that. And of course to Johan Grobler, my own marketing team, and your people who are there and has worked tremendously hard. Thank you very much for that. With that, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy tonight. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Francois. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you just indulge with us a little bit more, we will be getting onto the main part of the evening with the riveting discussion later. But we just taking it further on where Francois ended off, we just like to pay tribute to our sponsors by giving them a little certificate. But before we do that, Francois, I'm going to ask you to come back on stage in a moment. Can I just ask CEO, Grain SA CEO, Jannie de Villiers, if you'd like to come on stage just to say a few words, please, Jannie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. It's wonderful for us to be here. I said when I arrived at Nampo today, the team asked me, are you ready? And I said, well, my body is here, but my head is still coming along the way. We were very busy, and with especially all this land debates. We were last week having another round of discussions, and I was so encouraged with the rational way in which South Africans are taking this debate forward. And you know, we have we are doing conservation agriculture nowadays, so we don't plow any longer. But I think Nation in Conversation have plowed the fields so that we can put the seed in so that it can grow and feed this nation. And I thank you, Francois, for the initiative that you took and the sponsors that you have invested money in this country. It is almost the same as growing maize or growing soybeans or wheat or whatever the case may be. We are providing a platform for the nation to be fed and hopefully for our children one day to have a country that can also continue feeding them and our grandchildren one day. So thank you very much for joining and partnering, and it was a wonderful privilege for us, hosting Nampo, to actually allow this development over this 5 years to make a contribution in such a special way. So thank you very much to all, for what you've done and for what we are busy doing jointly for this country to take it forward through this difficult time that we are in at the moment. And I'm really confident that in the way in which this debate is going, that we will find each other and we will find a way, as South Africans, as we've done in the past, over very high hills, we can jointly do this thing. I was so encouraged with the caliber of people that is actually outside of agriculture, that is joining hands with us to find a way and a solution to all the problems that we're having and to fix whatever was broken in the past. That was very encouraging. So thank you very much just for that.
Thanks very much, Yanni. Now, Francois, if I could ask you to come up on stage, please. Ladies and gentlemen, just bear with us. We're just going to hand over these certificates. As it happens, Francois, the first certificate goes to yourself. No, Werner, die boonste een. Daar's hy. And Yanni, if you could do the honors. Photographers, this is your moment. If you could just face the photographer for a second there. There we go. Thank you very much, Yanni. Next up, we have NBK. Do we have a representative of NBK, asseblief? Dankie, Bessie. As julle drie net kan staan vir 'n fotootjie, asseblief. Look directly at the camera. There we go. Thanks very much. Werner, who do we have next? AFGRI. AFGRI, Chris Venter. Welcome, Chris. Good to see you here. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, without you guys, this really would not be happening tonight. So thank you very much once again. Big smiles to the camera. There we go. Everybody's got a phone these days, selfies. Lovely. Thank you. Next up, Monsanto. Kobus Steenekamp, as jy hier, daar's hy. Thanks, Kobus. Smile for the camera. Face up. There we go. Nice one. Meneer Daan Bronkhorst, asseblief, Hinterland. I was at the Nampo, Hinterland Standard Nampo today, and apparently they've got, not apparently, they have simulated racing cars. So if you've ever wanted to know what a Formula 1 car feels like, get yourself over there tomorrow. It's in promotion of their fuels, by the way, in case you were wondering. There we go. Thank you. Imperial Isuzu. Thanks to you guys for making the buckies available and being such a fantastic sponsor. We've traveled all across the country with your wonderful vehicles without any drama so far. Okay, face the camera. Thank you very much. There we go. And the Land Bank. Do we have a representative of the Land Bank? Thank you very much. I believe the Land Bank are having a closed session as well at Nampo. So they're having their own little bank in conversation. Yeah, the rose between the thorns, please, gentlemen. Big smiles. There we go. Thank you. And without the fuel, we won't get anywhere. Engine. Anybody from Engine? Going once, going twice? Oh, there we are. There we go. Thank you very much. Big smiles. There we go. We're Nedbank. Nedbank. Very big sponsor, very proud sponsor. Edwin was here bright and early at like 3:30 this afternoon. So welcome, Edwin. One thing you don't know about Edwin, he also writes a racing column for cars, and he rocked up here with the latest Alpha. Looking very pleased with himself. Thanks, Nedbank. Thanks, Edwin. And last but not least, now we return the pleasure. That's Grain SA. Just face the cameras once more, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for our sponsors, ladies and gentlemen. And now it's time for the moment. I'm going to introduce the panel. When I call your name, please, if you wouldn't mind, just coming up to the stage and take your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we'll be discussing the subject of have and have-nots, perception or reality. And really, it's a subject that doesn't really warrant any more description in the context of South Africa. I mean, we've all grown up here. We all know the politics. We all know the energy in our country. So it's a fantastic opportunity to discuss this. And the conversation will be anchored by Professor Nick Binedell. Now, Nick Binedell is a professor of strategic leadership at the University of Pretoria's Gordon Institute of Business. He was also a founding director of the institute. Professor, if you could come up on stage, please. Oh, there you are. Thank you. And the rest of the panel consists of Nompumelelo Runji, who is a political analyst and columnist. Nompumelelo. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly. Thank you. And then we have a fellow author and political analyst, Mr. Prince Mashele, right in front here. Prince, welcome. And now we go to big business, and that's the CEO of ZZ2, Tommy van Sail, if you'd like to join us on stage. Thank you. And then we have the carrot man, Mr. Vito Rugani, representing the Rugani team, who are probably one of the biggest producers of carrots, among other things, in South Africa. Welcome, Vito. And last but not least, we have another political analyst and columnist. You've probably read his work on News 24. None other than one of our favorite sons. He's been on the show before. He's hosted some shows and discussions. Mpumelelo Makabela. If you'd like to join the team, please. Now, before we begin the discussion, we will have a short video clip just to create context. As I mentioned earlier, it is in Afrikaans, so if you have a problem with Afrikaans, now is the time to raise your hand, and our team, there we have someone, 2, 3, the team will come around, you'll get a set of headphones, and you should be able to follow the discussion. Can we just sort out that first before we press play? Thank you. Anybody else? Raise your hand high so that guys can see, please. Thank you. Don't be shy. And just one more thing. Those of you, if it's your first time here, you're in for a treat tomorrow at Nampo. And if it's your first time experiencing Nation in Conversation, shame on you. You don't have to be ashamed anymore because you can download the app. If you can't get here, you can download the app and it allows you to participate in the discussion. So if you feel passionately about one of the subjects we will be discussing, download the app and you can actually send through your questions. And the producer of the show will make a call to see if your question is valid or is interesting, and they'll mention it on air, and the facilitator will discuss your particular issue. Are we all sorted with the headphones? Anybody else? Everybody fine? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, sit back and enjoy, and then after that, it's over to you, Professor. Thank you.
Vanaf hierso in swart woonbuurt.
I think everybody really is passionate about this town. Everybody would like to see this town progressing, would like to see this town being enhanced in terms of progress and prosperity.
Waar ons nou vandag staan ons voor 'n heeltemal 'n nuwe uitdaging. En ons kan dit nie bekostig om in verskillende silo's te werk nie. Dis belangrik, dis baie belangrik dat ons as verskillende gemeenskappe, plaasgemeenskap en dorpsgemeenskap bymekaar moet kom. En ons moet gaan kyk na ons gemeenskappe wat agtergebly het. En dan moet ons saam gaan sit en sê maar waarheen wil ons gaan?
When you come together, you are in the position to diagnose the challenges and the problems that we are faced with.
Die plaaslike regering is die fondasie van die dorp. So as die fondasie sterk is en al die dienste wat die munisipaliteit gee, as jy 'n vat 'n huis en 'n fondasie, weet jy, water, die krag, die riool, die skool, alles wat nodig is, die fondasie binne in 'n gemeenskap, as dit sterk is, dan kan die dorp fokus op die goed wat eintlik moeilik is om die ekonomie aan die gang te hou en behoorlike gemeenskapsbou te doen.
Ons weet nie wat die probleem is van die munisipaliteit is nie, want hulle praat niks nie, hulle sê niks nie. Ons is nie in politiek in, want politiek is 'n baie gevaarlike posisie om te speel. Die town manager, hy moet nou oorvat. Hy en die burgemeester, dan van die burgemeester na die raad toe. Hulle moet nou tyd vat om die groot mense wat in Swaziland bly, wat swart, geel, rooi, kan van mekaar bring, sit en gesels. En as hy dit kan doen, dan gaan die ding reg.
Wanneer hierdie goed 'n probleem begin veroorsaak, soos misdaad, en daar ontstaan 'n situasie, dan is daar ook buitepartye wat hierdie goed polities dryf. En ek dink dit is belangrik dat ons hierdie goed as 'n gemeenskapdiens moet sien. Dan gaan gemeenskappe nader aan mekaar toe beweeg. En die oomblik is gemeenskappe nader aan mekaar toe beweeg, kan daar druk dalk op strukture gesit word. If there can be more stakeholder engagement, more interaction, more skills transfer, more empowerment, more involvement, we have no excuse not to provide, quality basic services to our communities.
Begin daar waar jy die verskil kan maak. En nou op om vir ander mense te kyk, want ander mense kyk dalk wat jy besig is om te doen en dit kan dalk net die vonkie wees wat 'n totale gemeenskap omdraai met daai een klein gebaar wat jy doen.
They always say that you build the highest wall by putting the first brick. Community don't want you to give them fish. They want to catch the fish themselves. So if they get involved, then for them it will boost their confidence. It will bring back their dignity. It will also show that they have the skill to do things for themselves. And that's what people want to do.
Die armste van die armstes is altyd die mense wat die slegste daaraan toe is. Hulle is die mense wat die swaarste kry. En die gemeenskap is regtig, hulle is bereidwillig om hulle hand op te maak om die armstes te help.
The message is clear. there is a dire need for rapid improvement in rural communities and services delivery. How can the agri-sector play a greater role to achieve these goals? What role should our producers play? What can we do differently to build stronger and more positive relationships between diverse communities? With sustainability and economic growth in mind, how do we move forward from here? We welcome you to today's discussion, where we aim to find a realistic way forward.
Right, well, good evening, everybody. We've got a wonderful panel with a mix of analysts, commentators, and farmers who have got their hands around many of the issues we're going to debate tonight. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. We're going to start straight away. But welcome, everybody, and let's see what we can do in terms of analysis as to what these issues are about in rural communities, in small towns, the total interdependence of farming, with the success of these communities and towns in the future. We're meeting at a time in which all around this country there's a great deal of focus on this particular topic, so the timing is good. Please join me in welcoming the panel. I look forward to taking part in. I'm going to start with Nampo Rundi on my left, who is doing a doctorate and is working on this particular topic, and ask her to make some general observations about what her research has found. So can I start with you, Nampo?
All right. Just a slight correction. My research is focusing more on democracy and participation within social movements, but the questions of haves and have-nots and inequality do fit into that framework. And I think as we begin this discussion, although our focus is on rural towns, I think it is important to paint a broader context. Where do we locate this discussion when we discuss haves and have-nots within the context, the broader context of South Africa? And I think, although it's boring, it is important to always remind ourselves of the statistics and the problems that we're facing, the challenges that we're facing as a society. Today, the World Bank released its diagnostic report, country report on South Africa. And one of the key things that it looks at is this question of exclusion. And of course, they go on to mention what we now know as the triple challenge. Our government has made that quite popular, this phrase, the triple challenge, which actually speaks to inequality, poverty, and unemployment. And we know that these are chronic problems in South Africa. But I want to just shift the focus a little bit. Usually when we discuss inequality, we focus on income inequality. And we know that we are known to be the most unequal country in the world. When you look at the Gini coefficient, we're sitting at a Gini coefficient of 0.7, which is the highest in the world when it comes to income inequality. But some research that has now come out of Stellenbosch has shown that when we shift the focus from incomes to wealth, we're sitting at a Gini coefficient of 0.95, which is far worse than our income inequality. And why is that important? What that tells us is that if you've got 10% of the population which has a concentration of the country's wealth, it's a question of incomes can increase, but they can change as well. You can lose income. But what wealth does is that it generates its own income over generations and over time, right? So investments, assets, dividends, etc., those generate income over time. And so what happens is that the inequality is then entrenched generationally. So that's why it's important to be a little bit more nuanced when we discuss this inequality question in South Africa and what it actually means. And then when we look at the poverty situation, the statistics from Stats SA show us that between 2006 and 2011, we made some really good progress. Around 66% of the population was living below the poverty line in 2006. By 2011, we had brought that down to 53%. But what the statistics are showing us in 2015 is that we are gradually edging up again. So we're sitting at from 53% to 55% again. And some research is also showing that there is a challenge in terms of the intergenerational socioeconomic mobility. So those groups of the poor versus the middle class versus the rich, in terms of moving between, we are quite static as a country. And social mobility is quite precarious, and that's something that we need to deal with, and that's also linked to that wealth inequality challenge that we're facing. And then we come to the unemployment question. Usually we tend to focus on the number, you know, how stubborn this unemployment number is. It's sitting at about 26-27% over the last 2-3 years. And then the real unemployment figure, it's estimated to be around 34%. And we know that our youth unemployment is sitting at above 50%, which is really alarming. But what's also quite interesting in those figures is that of all the unemployed that we have in this country, 39% have never worked in their lives. And amongst the youth, that is actually 60% that have never, ever held a job in their entire lives. So that also tells us that the problem is deeper. It's structural. It's not just about the inability of the economy to grow and to create jobs, but it's about the crisis in our education system as well. And I think what it boils down to is that when we are discussing now these challenges that we are seeing also in our rural towns, we need to locate them within that. And the other key challenge that we face as a society that we really need to start being really honest about is the weak capacity of the state and our government that has actually failed in managing resources and has really struggled to actually address some of these problems, particularly when it comes to to service delivery, as we've seen in the video. You see a lack of water, lack of electricity, roads that are not in good order affect not just the poor, they affect the rich and the poor alike, and they affect the economy more broadly. So if you want to create a context within which to begin to solve these problems that we want to discuss this evening, the solutions to these problems, if the government is not geared, is not competent enough, is not there's no political will even, to begin to address the very infrastructure that creating that conducive environment within which society can begin to work on dealing with these deep-seated challenges that we face, then we are at a loss. And I think there's something we need to address. And I think, obviously, with the new dawn and President Cyril Ramaphosa, there seems to be some kind of optimism around that, perhaps beginning to be a focus. But I think that is really something that really needs to be addressed.
Lovely, thank you for that. So we'll come back to some of the issues you've raised, but let me just ask you this, two questions really. Can you apply your lens of the numbers to rural towns? Do you think rural towns, when you cite those statistics, are at the extreme of inequality and poverty and unemployment, and do you have any numbers or any way of describing that?
Yeah, you see, I think what's interesting about these numbers is usually when we deal with statistics, we just see numbers. We don't see people. And I think when you begin to look at even what we've just seen now in the videos, is that in rural, I think rural South Africa becomes a microcosm of these numbers that we're talking about. When you're talking about people who have not had access to jobs, people who are forced to migrate to urban areas looking for opportunities, who then find themselves in more precarious situations when they get into those urban areas. When you talk about young people who have not had opportunities, I think rural South Africa becomes a microcosm of those issues that we're dealing with. That is where you start seeing what poverty looks like, right? It's not just a number that stats say belts out. These are real people who actually are living in those conditions of difficulty. And so I think that it's a good place to start fleshing out the situation that we actually find ourselves in South Africa.
Thank you. Mpulelo, I'm going to come to you. In addition to being a former editor, you're a political scientist teaching politics. What is your take on some of the issues that have been mentioned by Mpulelo? And what are your particular comments about the haves and have-nots in this rural dynamic we face? Would you like to share some thoughts?
Well, on the face of it, it looks like a very simple question, but it's very complex. Before I make my substantial point, I just want to share with you some short story that I once heard from the former president, Kgalema Motlanthe, some time ago, when we were discussing the problems in the ANC of selfishness. He said to me that back in the day during the struggle, whenever there were funerals or social gatherings or weddings in the townships and the rural areas, the ANC activists used to stand in gardens, actually serve whoever was in the queue. And when everybody had eaten, and then they would then go dish for themselves. And then he said, now, the comrades, they eat first, and the people come last. That came from him. The point is that in any situation, there will always be somebody who has another person who doesn't have. In the context of that story, these comrades had some kind of social power in the community to organize the community. And they decided that they're going to use that power for the other people that were in the queue, because they are the organizers of things in the community. They all have their share last. Now, I come from a small town, a rural town, if you call it. It's a border town of Komatipoort. And there we have our own problem of haves and have-nots. If I may just describe it in this way. I come from a village called Ngwenyeni. It's separated by a railway line that comes from Komatipoort. It links up from Johannesburg, Komatipoort, it passes up to Swaziland. So we're on the other side. If you stand on the railway, on the bridge of the railway line that separates my village and the other side, you stand there, look at my village, it's red dust. The pattern of, well, I can't even talk about urban planning. The way the whole thing is structured is just chaotic. And then you look at the other side, the fields are very green, sprinklers, sugar fields. And on the other side is the sugar mill, owned by, I think it's owned by, what is this company? TSB, which is owned by LRC, I think it's LRC as they call it now. So it's the infrastructure there, the irrigation system is working, everything is fine, it's green, they've got access to Komati River. And on the other side, we have communal land, which is lying fallow. There's no irrigation system on the other side. There's no infrastructure for the farms on the other side. But the soil is the same soil because it's the same area almost. The other side is working, the other side is not working. So where do my people get food? They go get food from the other side that's working, but they've left land on the other side, which is not working and is not productive. But they have it. Some of them lost the land because they settled, they were near the river many years ago, and they were moved out as a result of the forced removals. And some of them succeeded to claim the land. The 10 bush claim is a very popular claim. But even in the context of that claim, there are haves and there have nots. After this claim was settled successfully, there are people who run the trust on behalf of the community. But they are like the Kgalema Motlanthe people. But they run the trust on behalf of the community. So they queue first and get the benefits first. And the community gets nothing. So in the eyes of the community, that land reform is not working. It's a failure. But the people who are running the trust, it is a success for them. Because they've got first hand to share the benefits. So the point I'm trying to make is that in any scenario, when you analyze properly in society, you will find haves and have-nots. The question is, those who have, what do they do with it? Sometimes I wish the guys on the other side of the green fields can cross and see what the other guys on the other side are doing and perhaps maybe help them so that next time I stand on the bridge, every side is green. And sometimes I wish that the guys who are running the trust after we succeeded in claiming the land in 10 Bush, I sometimes wish they can actually reorientate themselves to realize actually that they can actually use their power for the benefit of the community. After all, the whole claim was not about them. It was about the community. And I'm aware that there are so many claims like that. Land reform is succeeding in many cases, but what happens after? I don't think people pay attention to that. We can broaden the scope of the discussion to look at other areas where people have got power and what they do with it. We have got people who hold executive power in this country as the executive authority of the country. They run the government. They have the power. We don't have. It's another have and have not situation. And that's how democracy is designed, unfortunately. The question is, what do they do with it? We've got people who hold judicial power because they adjudicate disputes in society. What do they do with that power? Do they adjudicate in their own interest or in the interest of society? We have got people who legislate. They sit there in parliament. They've got power. What do they do with it? We don't have power. We sit here, we put them in office. Our power perhaps ends, we go to the ballot box and we vote, and there are other instruments where we can maybe do it and try and raise our concerns. But they actually have the legislative power. What do they do with it? You can go on and on. Some people have got mobilizing power in society. There are civil society groups, and some of us were columnists. What do we do with our power? And what do we use it for our own purpose to enrich ourselves, or do we use it for everybody else? I've got Tommy Van Sele. I'm very much interested to know. He has got capital. He's got all kinds of things. I wonder, what does he do with it? Does he use it for himself, or does he use it for the benefit of the community? And if so, how? I would love to know.
Good, thank you, because we're going to ask him. So, Tommy Van Sale, as was said in the introduction, is a remarkably successful commercial farmer. Tommy, I visited your ZZ2 operation a few weeks ago. It's an extraordinary story. What is your response to the two speakers who've articulated some of the dilemmas, and what I'd like us to move towards is some of the solutions? What are the ways forward about this? Your comments.
First of all, I think we should all be sensitive to the reality of South Africa and Africa. It's not only South Africa suffering of this problem. We're operating or involved in operations out of South Africa as well, and I can tell you a lot of the dynamics we have here exists outside of our border in Africa as well. That's the first point. The second point, agriculture as a solution for the economic problem of scarcity of resources and an abundance of needs shouldn't be overestimated. The agricultural industry only produces 2.5% in South Africa of the GDP. So if you want to solve the poverty problem in South Africa with agriculture, you're not going to succeed. We need to succeed on a bigger scale. We have a lot of problems in South Africa, but there's one thing that consoles me. In the medieval time in Europe, in the time of the Bourgeois in Europe, it was the worst problems that you could think about. And if you think what was produced in those times, people like Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Galileo, there's a joke that in the same time there was 500 years of peace in Switzerland, and the only thing they could produce was a cuckoo clock. So thinking about that, I think the problem in South Africa is that we're losing the leadership that was promised to us in 1994. In 1994, democracy, power to the people, a vote for everyone, and aristocracy, a better life for all, was promised. Now, if you have the vote, and the vote brings you lack of meaning in your life, meaning in terms of the space you're living in, that victory or achievement becomes hollow. I think that's one of our biggest problems in South Africa. You don't need to be rich to have meaning. If you have meaning in terms of hope for the future, in terms of opportunity to grow, people are very tolerant, and people are also perseverant. I know very poor people that kept on doing what they should be doing with the hope that one day I'll have my break. Second point is there should be equal opportunity for everyone. And by doing that, by how you achieve equal opportunities, our institutions should function on all levels. It doesn't help us at all to blame anybody. We should agree on the mantra that to have a better life for all, we should have our institutions working, inclusive or including businesses. And that's where we enter into the discussion now. The inequality in terms of the income distribution, there's also an interesting fact that I would like to share with you. We've taken over many farms, small farms that didn't make it. And then we had access to what their financial situation was. And what was very surprising for me is to see the reality of the Gini coefficient on a farm. What does the lowest wage earner earn, which is the minimum wage, versus what the top earner of that system, the farm owner, earns? And I was surprised to see that it varies between 10 times and up to 50 times on the examples that I'm using. Now, if you go to the Scandinavian countries, 10 times is about the norm. And I would say 50 times is also not too bad. Now, imagine between 10 and 50 times, that's the performance. So it reinforces my point. That's not where the solution really lies. The solution lies on a different level. If we just continue producing more tomatoes, our customers enjoy it very much because the price goes down and our profits go down, and we need to have larger economies of scale or larger farm so that with lower margins we can survive. We know that game very well. Very, very competitive business. Growing tomatoes in a free market where supply and demand determines the price. I can't make a price. If the price is too low, we can work at a loss for months on end. And then you have to keep your bank manager very close to you. And then when everybody is finished and you've survived, then the price goes up and you survive. That's the free market. To escape that, we need to utilize the Da Vinci's in ourselves or the Michelangelos in ourselves and think about our position in the globe. South Africa has unbelievable resources. Human resources, climate, water, and more important than anything else, our position in the globe. If you compare us with South America, or with Australia, or with the Northern Hemisphere, our strength is our location. We're 17 days by ship to Rotterdam in Holland, our traditional markets in Europe. The new markets developing from Durban to the east, Singapore, Malaysia, India, the Middle East, Shenzhen in China, 17 to 19 days. Our competitors on those same markets takes 34 days. So Southern Africa, from, I would say, the equator downwards, we have this location advantage. If we start focusing on, I would say, expanding the cake, symbiotic relationships, building the ecosystem, rather than a zero-sum game, which I think we're stuck in with at the moment, we can grow those markets and transform the agricultural industry. And I think, although we're only 2.5% of the GDP, what we have is the ability to influence the climate in the country, which is the most important thing. I remember the days when I was in high school, when Reverend Leon Sullivan used he actually put together the Sullivan Code of Principles. And the key word he used was affirmation, affirmative action. And then the poor Afrikaners got it wrong, and they translated it as rechtstellende actie, which is completely a wrong translation. They should have said bevestigende optrede, which means I recognize you, I see you, you're there, I respect you. Let's work together and see how we can build something together. That's affirmative action. I think affirmation is the one thing we should do. Affirmation is for me the key word. Secondly, after we've done that, the most successful, I would say, people system in our memory was the Roman Empire. And they had they called him the philosopher king. He was the Caesar, Marcus Aurelius. And it's attributable to him the conditions for an orderly and a civilized society. That's all we need in South Africa. Prudence, where there's thoughtfulness and where there's wisdom. Temperance, where we're humble in the way we consume, in the way we conduct ourselves. The third one is temperance. Fortitude. We should have no fear. We should pursue our goals single-mindedly. And then lastly, there should be justice and honesty in the system. If you think about the climate we can create, if you accept rules for an orderly and a civilized society, and you affirm each other, imagine what we can do in South Africa. All these ills that are symptoms of something else can be solved. So that's my thinking about this.
Lovely, thanks, Tommy. I have to say, on the way down, I didn't think I was going to hear about Marcus Aurelius. But that's a wonderful injection of philosophy. Let me just ask you, though, before I come to Vito, who comes from Italian heritage, what are the first steps, do you think, in this interdependence and need and affirmation you're describing? What are the practical few things that you think can be done in the near future?
I would say, first of all, to accept, I would call it open systems philosophy. First point of that is to stop thinking about yourself and thinking about the other. What is your neighbor doing? What is your neighbor's situation? How can you help? Maybe it's very small things that you need to do to help your neighbor. I think that's the first point. The second point is also, I would call it an outer directedness. Instead of focusing on yourself and all your problems, open yourself up and look at the world outside of your domain. Then I would also say, us as business people, we should create living companies where the company doesn't exist for the sole purpose of serving its owner. It should serve the purpose of, in balance, serving all its stakeholders. Probably the customer is the number one stakeholder, because if you can't sell a product at a profit, your whole system becomes meaningless. But affirming all the stakeholders and making sure the momentum created brings value that's distributed in balance through all the stakeholders. I think that's what I would say we should do if we want to start something in the right direction.
So we're going to come back, I'm sure, to your comments about power and the link to those very broad ideas. But Vito, let me come to you. You started as a small-scale farmer, and you now are a major producer. What is your take on what this issue of haves and have-nots and our rural economy?
Prof, I think Nampulele explained it very well. It's a wealth problem. And we sometimes take arguments like this and we take them to such a high level of statistics and philosophy that we actually lose contact with the ground to see what's actually happening there. And they say a picture paints more than 1,000 words. I want to paint a picture. You're a young man living in the Transkei, and you're ambitious, and you've qualified at a university, and you've got yourself a degree, or you're an artisan, and you decide you're going to go and look for a better future. And you're in agriculture, so you, as you so effectively said, there is land there, but there's no agriculture there. We're going to come back to why there's no agriculture there. And you depart, you get your young wife and your 2 kids behind your suitcase, and you head for one of the major hubs of agriculture. Now, when you get there, you couldn't sell a house, although you'd lived for 10 generations down in the Transkei. You couldn't sell a house to bring your wealth with you. You could bring your suitcase with you. So 10 generations of existence in an area meant you amassed no wealth because you couldn't own anything. You were a serf in a feudal system on the chief's ground. Now, my family left Italy for that very reason. They would work on the lands of the padrone, and at the end of the crop, they gave 75% to the padrone. and they had to feed their family on the 25 that they were left with. Same things happened. So we've come here looking for freedom. You get up to Tolton, where I happen to farm, and you've got three choices. You move into the squatter camp, where you are a serf on somebody else's land that doesn't belong to you, and you have some measure of protection from government legislation. You go to the farmer and you ask him for an area of the farm where you can put up a house. You don't own that house. You're back in the feudal system. You're living on the farmer's land. Or you go to the RDP house and you rent it, and now your landlord is the government. And you earn one stream of income, and that's your salary. Imagine this nation if somebody could leave where he'd worked for 10 generations and sell off his wealth and come up here and buy himself a house. You go to Italy, you fly over, well, whole of Europe. I flew over, in fact, this morning I was flying over Italy. And when you look down, you see an agrarian society, but there's something very different about it. There are little villages dotted all over the countryside. Who lives in those villages? We're not talking about towns. We're getting this mixed up. We were speaking about towns in the footage that we saw beforehand. Those are urban towns. They support the infrastructure that supports agriculture. But where the workers stay. Now the worker has changed his serfdom in a tribal system for a serfdom in a modern agricultural system. There are no towns. We have legislation which says that you cannot subdivide agricultural ground. You cannot buy a title deed, affordable title deed to build your house. Imagine if he could sell something where he was, come here, buy a house here, bond that house so that he could educate his children. Bond that house that they could afford a deposit on a piece of ground to become farming. The problem is they have no wealth. And we are blind to this country to see the obvious. We have a people within a people that have never, ever had wealth. They don't understand the free market system because they've never been allowed to partake in it. The fact that a nation that teaches its people to become dependent is doomed to failure. We have taught our people to become dependent. The farmer must put up his village. The government must put up their home. When are we going to teach people to become independent? To work for your own future, to have the dignity that somebody mentioned, to be able to build something up. Imagine your family never having owned a piece of ground, and you've been in this country for 300-400 years. They've done actually very well for themselves, those landless people. I'd like to ask one interesting question. Who issued the first title deed to a family ever in the history of mankind? Who gave us the 10 Commandments? Everybody knows that one. When Joshua crossed the river, the Jordan River, into the promised land, God gave him an instruction. You take the land and you subdivide it into titles, and the titles get given to the head of the household for that family to be inherited by their children, their children's children. It was an instruction from God. The whole notion of a title deed that belongs to a family. And you know what happened to that nation? It became, under Solomon, it was a huge nation, huge success. And one of the things was it had this idea of wealth creation. The double stream income. I work with my hands, I get my salary, but my house is appreciating all the time. A lot of black people today don't find it incredulous that white families have got so much money. But they did it with 2 income streams. They invested in houses and education, and they created wealth for themselves. The problem is not simple. The problem is simple to solve. Not easy to execute, but it's simple to solve. Somewhere along the line, we've got to start understanding that freedom is the ability to amass wealth. Any other freedom is not worth it. Political freedom, if it doesn't end with the ability to amass wealth, is not political freedom.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Prince, that's a platform for you, having had 4 interesting comments. The floor is yours.
We now, at least my job is now easy. We now know there are haves and there are have-nots in South Africa. So I will not go there. I'll start here. I'm going to borrow your last principle, which is honesty. I want us to be honest. South Africa today, the country you know, minus black people, would there be have-nots? So you take all black people out of this piece of land we call South Africa, you remain with whites. Would there be have-nots? Statistics tell me that poverty as a percentage of white society is 0.6%. That's what statistics South Africa tell us. So essentially, that is not structural poverty, it's functional poverty. The economists would call it that. So the problems of have-nots, has been completely eliminated among whites, literally. But there was such a problem among whites at some point in history. I'm glad you went back to, I'm not going to get there, that's too far. We don't need to get out of South Africa to learn how to solve the problem of the have-nots, which is fundamentally a black problem in South Africa today. We must, because South Africa is a laboratory, we must ask the question, how did white people eliminate the problem of the have-nots? Because they had it. Think of the 1820 settlers, the English, right? They were dumped somewhere in the Eastern Cape, very poor, had nothing. How did they turn their lot around? Today, the English in South Africa have completely eliminated the problem with the have-nots. And I'm going to reflect on institutions. It's not about thinking about your neighbor and the other stuff, the matter of their heart. You can think about your neighbor, can give whatever to my neighbor. It's not going to solve systematically the problem of the have-nots. And that's not white people, how white people solved it, by the way. They loved each other, but they lived in poverty. They were poor. So you love each other, you greet each other every day. You poor, it doesn't change anything. 3 things. The English, one, they used the state, but it didn't do much at a time for them. It couldn't buy things for them because the state was actually not in South Africa, it was back in England, because this was a population that was far away. But it backed up the English population militarily at the time. Number 2, choose the mine. If you look at the development of mining in South Africa, you will find the Englishman at the top and the Jew, all the way from Kimberley. The Englishman and the Jew was at the top. The rest of the other chaps down there, the Afrikaners were not even allowed to come close to mining. They were roaming around the bushes for a good number of years. The third thing, and I'm talking about the English, I'm coming to the Afrikaners. They used the school. So the English established their own schools to educate their own children in the main. For many, many, many moons, the Afrikaners were not part of that system. But the English were educating their kids. So if you ask the question, how did the English in South Africa, who were poor at some point, deal with the problem of the have-nots? These are the 3 institutions. Without these 3 institutions, it doesn't matter how much they love each other, they would never have solved it. So I'm done with the English, I'm coming to the Afrikaners, and I'll conclude with the blacks, who are dealing with the same problem today. Then come the Afrikaners, the so-called poor white problem that you know very well. In the main, affected the Afrikaners. The Carnegie Commission, in the main, affected the Afrikaners. How did the Afrikaners solve their problem? They have not. The state backed its people. 2, the factory in 2 forms. The parastatal and the real private factory. As you know very well, the parastatals were introduced in South Africa in the main by Afrikaners. So they sucked all the unemployed Afrikaners into the parastatal system, right? And then you had the Ruperts of this world who actually ran actual factories, employed their own people. And they also used the farm for the Afrikaners. But again, the school. So, to convert an Afrikaner from someone who was running around in the bushes to become a civilized citizen living in the urban areas, it took these instruments. And these are institutions. Without these institutions, forget it. The Africans may have loved each other, would have roamed around the bush without solving their problems. I'm coming to the blacks as I conclude. If the black people wanted to solve their have-not problems, which affected the English, and they solved it successfully. Today, poverty in the white community is 0.6%, or the Afrikaners. They have no choice but to use similar institutions. One, the state must back them up. Two, the factory. The black government has not facilitated the building of a factory. The black people who have money, who are wealthy, were actually sucked into the white man's boardroom in the name of BEE and occasionally attend meetings to receive dividends. They never built factories. They didn't. Cyril Ramaphosa didn't build factories. No. The Afrikaners, they built factories. They were never sucked into factories of the English. That's why they were able to solve their own problem. The black people didn't do so. So if you were to go around and say, show me this new post-1994 massive factories built by black people who are millionaires, who are employing their own people, thousands of them, you will never find. The third thing is the school. The black government didn't mess up the school. The bit that was there in black communities, the schools that I went to school under apartheid, totally messed up today. There is absolutely no way you can solve the have-not problem of black people if the school is not part of the equation. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem that is getting complicated of the have-nots. That problem is fundamentally a black problem. Let us not beat about the bushes. Black people have been abandoned by their own government because the chaps who are running the state, who are black, have become so corrupt that they've completely forgotten about their own people. The reason why white people manage to solve their own have-not problem is because the elite did not distance themselves from the have-nots who are white. We black people have been sucked out of townships and rural areas to go into the suburb, and the chaps who are running the state have completely forgotten about their people. This, by the way, it's what creates problems, race relations problems. So the tension that is growing in South Africa between whites and blacks, it has got to do with the corruption of the black elite. Because the black elite are actually saying to the black people that they have abandoned, you are poor and your situation is not improving because of white people, because they have wealth, which is nonsense. The condition of black people is worsening because the state is not used as an instrument, just like white people use the state to improve their own people. So it is in our collective interest as both black and white to talk about the corruption of the black elite in order for us to turn the situation of blacks around. Thank you.
Thank you, Prince. So before I come to the audience, to get some response, I'm just going to ask one or two questions. You talked about power in the formal sense earlier, and Prince has given some indication of some mechanisms. I mean, what are your responses, if you would like to, Nampo, just to comment, or anyone else to comment? So we've had a very wide range of views here, from the philosophical to the dynamics of the stages of development amongst English Afrikaners and now black South Africans. We've had comments about farming, a little about farming. I'd like to hear a little more about the inequalities and haves and have-nots, particularly around this ecosystem of agriculture. So anyone want to pick up from what other panelists have said before I talk to the audience? Do you want to comment?
The point that perhaps Prince missed in his analysis is that the English and the Afrikaners were able to lift their people out of poverty in the context of a discriminatory system of colonialism and apartheid. But that should not be the excuse why the current black-led government cannot lift its own people in a context where everyone is free. Actually, it's much more liberating to do that now aggressively, where everyone is free, no one is locked up. Even the resources that are there from the other community, you can actually use them because it's available, it's a free country. You can actually use those resources to empower your black people. It's not going to be a closed-up system. A closed-up system where you exclude other people might take longer because you have to develop the skills within that community over a long period. So the quicker route is use the resources that are available across society, across all the racial groups, to empower your own people. So the government now is in a much more advantageous position because it's a legitimate government in an open democratic system, recognized all over the world, unlike the previous government. And secondly, it's got communities that have had that experience of lifting people out of poverty. So it's quite enormous experience and skill, and it's got lots of capital and resources, which with the right mindset, with the right leadership, can actually be channeled to lift the rest of the population.
So given that we're a constitutional democracy and we have the rights you've talked about, and Tommy's referred to the fact we shouldn't start with our own needs, but with the other, do we have the raw material to move this forward? And why are we not grappling effectively with this growth and inequality? Tommy.
I think one of the problems we have is we haven't developed an aggregated commons, aggregated common cause. And that's where the big problem lies. We're focusing on the problem rather than thinking about the solution and starting to perform to get to the promised land. If you look at the institutional, I would say, meltdown, people that owns farms through the land distribution or redistribution and restitution program, people having access to land. If you look at the Limpopo province, how many farms have been transferred to the new owners? And because of a lack of institutional support, because of a lack of, I want to call it an inspiration, a collective inspiration, linked to the reality of a market, of skills, knowledge, technology, of a combined effort, it's a failure. It's going to take real leadership to bring back meaning. Why are we doing what we want to do? To bring back an inspiration.
What do you see as the role of the state in that, Tommy?
I think the first thing, the state should be a trusted umpire. If you have a state official that does something because he thinks how he can get something for himself out of it, it's failed. You need an independent official that says, I'm an official for my life. I've decided this is my job, and I'm not going to try and be an entrepreneur official. If I'm an official, I'm just doing this job. We've seen that throughout our societies. An official that stays an official, which is different to somebody that takes a chance and that can go bankrupt. The official will never go bankrupt because he earns his salary. The person that's entrepreneurial, he'll start something, take a chance, and he might lose everything. That's the difference.
How big is the form of title? You talked about the wealth. You started this comment, Montalel, about wealth. How important is the form of title? So I'm thinking of trust land and the history of ownership and the current ownership forms of title. How important is that? And what should be done about it? So would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. I think one of the biggest challenges I have with our land reform debate right now, particularly with this land expropriation without compensation business, is this overwhelming focus on commercial agricultural land. And then, of course, now there's this big focus on urban land. But we don't really talk about communal land and the arrangements there.
So let's talk about it.
And how it is that it disadvantages black people. I mean, I think, the point was made very, eloquently and succinctly. Without title deeds, there is no way that people can make wealth out of what they have, out of the land that Bumelo talks about. Yes, it's there, it's theirs, it belongs to the chief or they own it communally. But without that ability to say, I own this thing, I have an interest in it, I have a stake in making it work, and I can risk it, you know, and make something out of it, it's very difficult to think that communities are going to be so cohesive in the sense that they're going to work together consistently to create wealth for themselves. I think this expectation that black people must do things communally, and not be given the chance to individually pursue ambition, to individually pursue asset and wealth creation. And I mean, I speak as a young middle class person who has had an opportunity to have a bonded house, you know, and see my property appreciate, and be able to use that to give me access to other opportunities, whether in business, etc. And I think it's something very important that we need to begin to speak to as well. It's not just about dispossessing one group for the benefit of another group. So as we talk about the importance of redistribution in the context of the injustices of the past, we need to also talk about the importance of empowering black people. And it goes back to what Prince said as well, in terms of the institutions that our government should be using to empower black people, and that it's not doing at the moment.
So would you support reform to this form of title?
I think I would. I think I definitely would, but it has to go hand in hand with the things that Prince has spoken about, the importance of using the state and the power that, you know, control of the state gives you, using the factory or, you know, the industrial opportunities that control the states can help you create, and also education. And I mentioned in my opening remarks as well, the fact that we have a crisis in our education system, and that's something we just can't ignore. And it has a lot to do with the failures that have already been articulated.
Let me ask the two political scientists in particular whether they think the politics of South Africa now are likely to lead to significant reform in terms of trust land and title.
No, it's not going to happen. You see, here is the thing. This specific problem about the model of ownership of land doesn't make sense to we who now live in Pretoria, Johannesburg, because there it's, you buy a piece of land, you buy property. It actually applies to rural South Africa, where black people live. I love theory, but I think we must resort to practice. The EFF, for example, is preaching this message of land expropriation without compensation. One of the people who are trembling in their segment of people who are trembling in their boots are chiefs, black chiefs in rural areas. It's not only white people who own farms, it's not ZZ2 only who are scared. Chiefs in rural areas. The reason why they are scared, it is because they say that they are trustees of land on behalf of black people in the rural areas, which is nonsense. I'll tell you, I come from a small town, so I know what I'm talking about, called Bushbuck Ridge. There's no problem of land there. Ruralitarians, they have land. Most of it is unproductive. But the people who are benefiting from the commercial value of that land are chiefs. They lease out land and the money goes into their pockets, not into the pockets of the so-called the people. Let me give you a practical example. I'm an amateur businessman when I don't do political analysis. So I had an opportunity to build an office block for an entity. I'm not going to tell you the names. So I go to a chief. I say, look, this is what I do. I build offices. I've got this and that. I've spotted land here. I would like to build on that land. Please give me permission, because this land is for the people, but I have to come to you. So I sit with the chief himself. So he tells me point blank that he wants shares in my company. So we have this back and forth. I'm thinking, this chief, I have a business idea. But he wants shares in my company. I told him, you know what? Of course, I told him politely to go to hell, and I abandoned the project. If there was a system that allowed me to buy that piece of land, I would have paid for it. And I would have built an office block, and that entity would be operating there. So it's not going to happen because the chiefs are milking the system, and the black politicians are afraid to tell them the truth, because they use rural areas as reserves to get voting for order, right? So that's why it's not going to happen. But maybe it will take columnists like Mpumelelo to raise these things openly until the chiefs relent.
Do you want to comment?
Well,
I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, what Prince is saying is true because, well, my family, in my village, we own a small piece of land. And since my grandmother died many years ago, because she was the one who actually understood how the weather system works. And I think she knew how climate change works. But she was not educated. She kind of like knew when to plant, when not to plant. Now, the system is now beating us. We can't, you plow in November, you don't get the thing. You plow in December, we don't get it right. We never actually get the rain right. So anyway, so that plot of land, it's under the chieftaincy system, where the chief holds it in trust. So we can't sell the land. I can't say to my brothers, let's go to the bank, let's go to the land bank and raise capital out of that land and maybe install an irrigation system on our own, because the government is not really interested in installing any irrigation system there. No one wants to help the community. And by the way, my community is a microcosm of a bigger problem in rural areas where there's no irrigation system. So land is just lying fallow there. People leave their land to go and be laborers or farm workers working for Tommy. But they have left land at home where they could have planted their own tomatoes, if not to feed themselves, at least to sell in the village. You know? So I can't raise capital out of my parents' piece of land. Or should I call it, is it the chief's land, basically? So I can't raise capital. It's a small piece of land, but I tell you what, I owned a flat in Cape Town many years ago in a small little plot. It was mine. I sold it 10 years later, and I made 25% profit. So I can't do that with my farm there. Even if I want to reinvest the capital, I can't do it. So it's a system is stifling entrepreneurship in the rural areas, and we are not able to learn the hard way, because part of this thing, by the way, that we are talking about, the free market system, is not necessarily beneficial to all. You can actually sell your land and invest the money badly and lose out. But sometimes you have to go through that system to understand how the economy works. For as long as you have not been through that, chances are that you will never know how the wealth creation system works.
I think it's called Steinhoff. All right. Some lessons are tougher than others. Let's open up to comments or questions from the floor. I'm going to take 3 questions. Please keep them short so we can try and answer them and direct them to the panel if you would like to. Or if it's a general question, please make it just a general question. Let's take 3 at a time and let's start to move. So hands are up. Who would like to start? It's amazing how you can lose eye contact with 60 people. You've heard a lot of stuff, so let's climb in. Let's hear your views.
Silence means consent.
Here we go.
Nick, thanks. I think I would like to hear the panel's view on what is preventing South Africa today to give title deeds to homeowners in townships to start this process. I know it's not the end, and we need to fix the education system on top of that, but what is preventing us today from just doing it? Because it's not going to cost the government anything in terms of money.
Thank you, Yanni. Let's get another one. Nobody? Going for the first time? All right, let's get a comment on urban land. Urban title.
Townships. By the way, here's the thing. The majority of black townships in South Africa, owners of homes have title deeds. That's something that most people don't know. It's true. If you go to Davidton, they have title deeds. If you go to Tembisa, they have if you go to Soweto, they have title deeds. If you go to Tulamahashi, Mdantsane, they have title deeds. The only places where they don't have title deeds are in the new RDP settlements. And that's where the politics is. Mayor Mashaba in Johannesburg has, at his recent State of the City address, he mentioned how many title deeds he has handed over, essentially to those who own RDP houses. Now, the problem of black poverty, this is the controversial point, is not necessarily the lack of title deeds. The people of Davidton have been living in those houses for, I don't know, since when. The people of Soweto have been living in those houses with title deeds for many years. Now, a student of Adam Smith would say the people of Soweto must be taught how to use the value of their houses in the township to make money. That's what a student of Adam Smith would say. But that's not the problem. The problem is that the people of Soweto, in the main, are not educated. They don't have skills. So, even if you have a house with a title deed, if you don't have skills, what are you going to do with it? You go to Nedbank. There's a chap from Nedbank here. And say, I have a house in Soweto. I have a title deed. I want you to borrow me 300,000 against my house. That fellow from Nedbank is not going to give you. I can tell you. Where he will tell us. He will never give you. He will ask you, one, what do you want to do with the 300,000 rand? That's number one. It's called a business plan. Because he can't give you 300,000 rand to go and consume. He wants to give you 300,000 rand to go and invest in a project, not in your house. That is the problem. Which is why I say the school has to be part of that project. That's what turned around white people in South Africa. It is the school. It's skills that you now go and use in a whole range of sectors in the economy. If you don't have that, you can have a title deed and live in that house. By the way, in black culture, whole cultural thing about it. And we're not the only for the rest of their life their lives in one house without selling.
Good, thank you. Anyone else to pick up on the title deeds? It's not the title deeds, it's the skills. Right, let's take another question. Who wants to ask a question?
Well, sorry, the politics of the RDP houses as well has got to do with the government not trusting the beneficiaries of these RDP houses. The government believes that if these people were to get a title deed immediately when the house is handed to them, they would then sell it. And after selling it and go back to the housing queue, to queue for a house. And then it becomes, the government never met its targets. Some of these people are already renting these houses out to Zimbabweans, to foreigners. And the government has taken an issue with that. So what they do, you get an RDP house, you open you make it a flat, someone rents it, and then you go and live in a backyard somewhere else. And you make money out of that. So black people actually know how to make money out of the house.
I was going to say, it sounds entrepreneurial.
Yeah. But the government never gave them the house for that purpose. So the government doesn't want them to sell the house. The government doesn't want them to make money out of the house. It wants them to sleep on the house.
If I go to Volksrust or Humansdorp or Colesberg, where I've gone to look, a lot of farm workers have come off the farms and are now living in these towns under very tough conditions. I'm assuming they don't have title deeds. Can someone just articulate that dynamic? How many people have left farms? Where have they gone to stay? And what is their future? Because part of the solution, surely for agriculture, is to have people living under good conditions. What are the dynamics of small towns and title? So I get what you're saying, Prince, about Soweto and so on. You're right, 50, 60 years later. But what about Volksrust and Humansdorp and Colesberg, where I see hundreds, if not thousands, of shacks that are new, that seem to me to be from workers who've come off the farms?
If I speak about rural Limpopo, the process of people leaving the farms to have freedom because I can start my own house. I'm independent. I'm not governed by the farm owner. That has been happening for a very long time. In our region, all the options that the people have is to go to, I would call it communal land, where there's a chief and the land doesn't belong to the person. So there's very few options. I would say it's a handful options where a person can go to Gapani and have a title like Tulamahash. It's organized in a way that if there's a political will, it can be converted if the policy and the act and the will of people wants to do it, because it's demarcated.
Just a small addition about farm workers. I've been to many farms. I get invited. In fact, this friend of mine has invited me to a farm. I'm coming to your farm. Here's a phenomenon about farm workers that you all know. You are farmers. I'm not a farmer. It's a system that has been there for many, many moons in South Africa. Farm workers, there is a category of human beings called farm workers who actually live on farms owned by the farmer. So I went to this avocado farm of my friend, who's black, not white. So he takes me through the farm. We drive through, and his bucket shows me everything, beautiful. Boom, in the middle of the farm, we get to a community of black people who live in this part of his farm that is hidden. You will never see it. These people don't have television, most of them. They don't even know what the hell is going on in South Africa. They are living their own lives. I look at the thing. And by the way, the quality of their housing generally in South Africa, I've been to many farms, it's terrible. Generally, it's terrible. And these people are tied to that kind of system. You hear stories from time to time involving death in their families when the farmer doesn't want them to bury their loved ones on the farm. But other than that, we don't actually hear about them. They don't even want to go and to leave that farm and go live elsewhere, because where would they go? Because that's the thing they have been used to. And by the way, they give birth, their kids grow up, they're part of that system. I mean, this is something that exists. I've seen it with my own eyes. So we really have to tell each other the truth when we talk these things, because these things exist in our communities.
Good. Questions or comments? If not, I'm going to wrap up the discussion. Going for the first time? Second time? Second time? Second time? Second time? Second time? Second time?